the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 3, Episode 7. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, we're back with part 2 of our deep dive into department stores. I've got you on to myself today, which is great. And, we're a couple of department store veterans ourselves, so we'll be talking to each other.
Department store dinosaurs?
Talking to our audience. Well, I don't know about dinosaurs, but we're certainly veterans. Let's just put it that way. We came out of the department store sector, so it's part 2. But first, let's jump in to our news of the week. So lots of interesting things happening. And again, a reminder to the listeners and viewers that we're now weekly after the summer. We enjoyed our summer, but now weekly. There's so much going on. Really excited to be coming at you weekly. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about is RH. This Restoration Hardware became RH. They put out some numbers that were just bananas good. And I even read in their numbers, what it was like 375% increase in their share price. That doesn't always equate to how good the business is performing in the weird world we're in. And now they're selling like home communities that people are buying sight unseen. Like, talk about RH. It's such an interesting business.
Well, they are becoming kind of this next generation lifestyle brand. They made the decision 6-7 years ago to go after a particular set of customers with a particular kind of design aesthetic, build these temples to home furnishings that they've been opening. And it has worked really, really well so far. And it is, as you said, giving them opportunities to look at some new things. But if you just look at their core business, it's been on fire for several years now. The comparisons, because they're so physically store dominant, the comparisons to last year were pretty easy. But if you look at it over the last several years, it just continues to be really great sales performance. They're converting it to the bottom line really well, planning to open a bunch more stores. Now, they're certainly benefiting from the kind of distorted spending in home. But the flip side, which they talk about in their earnings release, is they've had a lot of supply chain issues. So if they could actually get product the way they normally could get product, you kind of wonder what these numbers would have looked like. So the road ahead is a little probably choppier for them, both because of supply chain and probably some ebbing in this home spending, but it's impressive.
I think for a brand like that, supply chain issues are probably not as problematic as others, because people, they wait for their order. Right. And once they've made the decision, they probably wouldn't cancel it. They're not going to go over to another competitor and redo the buys.
Particularly, I think the big ticket nature of it, and lots of other companies don't have product either. So it's not like you've got a ready substitute.
Let's stretch our minds now to Lululemon, probably a business that's benefiting from the COVID era and the kind of lifestyle, but outpacing everybody. What are your thoughts on Lululemon?
This is a bit. I think these are one of these businesses we've talked about before, that their strategy of blending digital and physical has been strong for a while. They've invested very smartly. And then the cherry on the sundae, I guess, is the shift towards athleisure and the product categories they're in. But I think even if you back out the category spending, they're certainly gaining share and they're firing on all cylinders. So again, probably a little bit like RH, they're not going to have quite the tailwind from some of the spending distortions, but a beautifully executed business. And I think the momentum will continue there.
And it seems like to me that they've got some airspace to move. They really have just started to address the male side, the men's side of the business. They have a male line, but they're really, predominantly female. And they've bought into what's that company, Mirror, which is that virtual thing, right? So that, stretching the business again, not to kill that metaphor, but, stretching the business in different directions that all seem to make sense.
Well, yeah, the mirror thing was a little bit of a question in some of the analysts' takes on their earnings report, because that was a big acquisition that does seem to really fit into this blending of physical and digital worlds, subscription business, a lot of things that seemed pretty attractive. People were pretty excited about when the acquisition was made, but they didn't talk very much about Mirror, which made people a little bit suspicious. But perhaps it's much ado about nothing. But yeah, they've got a lot of levers to pull going forward.
let's talk about Amazon. We always seem to talk about Amazon. They've always got something interesting going on in their business. Shop it like you stole it technology coming to Whole Foods. That's a big deal, right?
I'm not sure they prefer that branding, but what people may know from the Amazon Go stores, the walkout technology, I think is what they call it, where you are checked into the store through your mobile device. You're able to just walk out and it automatically charges the credit card you have on file with them. They are experimenting with this in a bunch of places. The most recent announcement is they're going to put it into a couple of Whole Foods stores. So like we always seem to talk about with Amazon, they experiment with so many things. It's hard to say, oh, they're doing this in a couple stores, that this has got any big indication of what's next. But they definitely seem to be flexing their muscles with the walkout technology and bringing it to Whole Foods is definitely interesting.
The other little thing that they're doing, which is kind of interesting in their fresh stores, which is their grocery store concept, is they're doing drive-throughs, which I guess, my God, Sears did drive-throughs 50 years ago. So, they're not exactly innovating there, but in some way it's pretty interesting, right?
Well, when I read this story, there was part of me which was, has nobody done drive-thrus at a grocery store yet? Because it does seem in some ways like a really obvious thing to try, particularly as we've seen more curbside pickup, buy online pickup in store, home delivery.
Yep.
So this idea that you could just drive through and pick up stuff as opposed to going into a parking space and waiting for somebody seems kind of obvious. I do know from talking to some people about this that logistically, it's like the McDonald's drive-through, right? If you can go through there in a certain amount of time, it's great.
Right.
If you start to get delayed and it starts to get backed up, then everybody behind you is unhappy.
Yeah.
So I can see why maybe this isn't such an obvious thing to do. But again, I think Amazon's always experimenting with things, and this convenience aspect is becoming more and more important for lots of retail. And so I think this is just another step in that evolution.
Well, let's talk about retail industry a little bit, particularly the forecast for Q4, whether it was NRF or anybody who you wanted to ask was just a hockey stick, as we would say. It was very strong growth. But there's been a few spanners in the works, so to speak. You've got supply chain challenges. You've got labor issues. I was talking to a retailer today, and he said, where'd all the people go?
Right.
I don't get it. Like, everybody can't find people. Where did they all go? Like at any level, you got, you got supply chain issues. As I said, you've got COVID rearing its head, plus or minus still, and probably for a while. What do you think? Would you think people are going to start resetting their expectations, or are consumers on both sides of the border just going to be the Timex watch that keeps on ticking? What do you think?
I think this is probably the most difficult forecast I don't do formal forecasts, but to try to articulate what's going to be happening in the coming months. I think this is the hardest it's ever been. There's so many moving pieces. I think absolutely the consumer overall is in really good shape. Equity markets are good. If you're in the market, you're feeling pretty wealthy, but you got a lot of things affecting consumer confidence. The supply chain issues just seem to be getting worse and worse. I mean, anecdotally, I've been hearing this. My older daughter sent me an email she got from, I think it was Ann Taylor, Loft by Ann Taylor, basically saying, we don't know if we're going to have any product and we're sorry. So I mean, if you're being that proactive with customers, it wasn't even about holiday, like shop early. It was just like, hey, we're sorry. We're doing the best we can, but we just can't get stuff. I think if you're already out there doing that, as well as some of the other things we've all heard, it's a pretty scary time. So if you don't have the product, you can't sell it. And for most retail, unlike what we were talking about with RH, people aren't going to wait. They're going to go where they can get the product if they really need it. The labor side is crazy. I just to tell one story, I placed a curbside pickup order with Crate and Barrel on Sunday, and I have done pickup from there a couple times before, and I could easily go into the store and get it, but I was going to be really busy that day. I just wanted to pick it up. I still haven't gotten it. I called the store, I chatted online, and they said, basically, we are just overwhelmed with orders. We can't keep up. And I've seen this happen in a bunch of other places where, restaurants where plenty of tables, but they can't serve you because they don't have enough wait staff. So it's clearly an issue affecting service levels, and it's got to be a barrier to spending. The only positive side in not having inventory is you don't have to mark down as much stuff. So I think the margins will be good.
Yeah.
And the price inflation kind of makes the sales number perhaps look a little bit better than it actually is when you look at unit volume. But it's a crazy time. Even even if you had a crystal ball on where COVID was going to be over the next few months, just what we're walking into from a labor and supply chain side is really tough.
Well, and there's another side of the supply inventory. And again, talking to retailers this week, they said, listen, I got more inventory than I ever had in my life because I'm not just buying this order. I'm saying, okay, give me both orders, because there's so much uncertainty in the supply chain that they're taking more risk on inventory. Right. So when it kind of the school of thought is, if I can get it, get double, because, I think there's confidence that there's still buoyancy in the economy and demand side for many commodities, but the uncertainties in the supply chain. So literally retailers are running out of places to put stuff. And if you think about holiday, for example, seasonal merchandise, the window really isn't, the entire holiday season. People are buying their baubles and whatever in weeks. It's very narrow. And retailers, I think, are figuring, I'm just going to when I can get it, I'm going to get it. And therefore I'll maybe have a step up against my competitors. Well, anyway, let's keep a close eye on it. I'm glad we're weekly, because I think it's going to change week to week. My goodness, the news ebbs and flows week to week, so that's an advantage of our format. All right, well, let's dip into our episode. So last week we had a couple of great guests on, Simeon and Ethan, talking about everything from dead cat bounces to department store valuations to retail renaissance at department stores. Optimism, cynicism. We gave you a new name, Steve. Invest in cat bulldozers, because that's where you think B malls are going to wind up.
Dr. Doom,
bulldozed into the ground. Dr. Doom. So on that cheery note, let's frame it in this episode. Again, it's just you and I. Take us up in a little bit of history, just to bring everybody up to the same speed as you've seen department stores evolve. How they got into so much trouble in the before time. It's not like they were clean sailing and COVID kind of upset the cart. What to make of the current big name strategies. Was there a bit of a renaissance, as I said, because people were doing one-stop shop, and maybe that's going to continue. And then really put your hat on for the long term and say, if you were running, if we were running a big department store, what are some of the decisions that we would be making? So why don't we start off with a little bit of the how we got here first part of the thinking of department stores.
Yeah, I don't want to do too much of a history lesson, but I do think there are some things that might be useful for younger listeners, but also just in terms of how retail has evolved. So if you think about the origins of department stores going back more than 100 years, department stores were really kind of this palace of consumption. The original department stores were primarily in the big cities around the world, and they were the original everything store, particularly on the higher end. So they were destinations. People would make special trips to go to the, whether we're talking about Harrods or the flagship stores of Saks Fifth Avenue.
They get dressed up too, right?
Yeah. Right. It could be, Neiman Marcus, where some listeners will know I worked, there are a lot of stories about the original Dallas store of people coming in from, West Texas, Oklahoma, just to, make a special visit. It was almost, both tourist attraction as well as a place to buy things. So there was this sort of long history of mostly family run, kind of iconic department stores in the major cities. And that was kind of the way it was for a long time. As cities grew up, then there were these family-run department stores in the cities that became bigger cities, Houston, whatever. Then really kind of post-war was the growth of suburbia, at least in the U.S., but other markets as well, and the birth of regional department stores. And so some of the names that we would all know, like Sears and Macy's, they started to expand by building expansion versions of these stores in the suburbs largely, or in some cities that they weren't in before. And the thing that I think was really interesting that is so much not the case anymore was they were kind of these sort of stores, Sears, Penny's, Macy's, Bonwit Teller, and go kind of down the list of these iconic names. They were kind of the only place to go to get certain kind of merchandise, either everything in one place or certain brands. there really weren't a lot of choices. And as these malls got built, the malls themselves became this magnet. So you had this period, 50s, 60s, 70s, of enormous growth in regional malls and in the anchors or in the brands that anchored them. Sears was the biggest retailer on the planet, but there were other brands that had huge market share, not only in the US, but Canada, UK, et cetera. What started to happen was first, I would argue, 60s and 70s was the advent of the discount mass merchant off the mall. So Walmart obviously being the most famous, but there were a lot of them. When I was growing up, we had Corvettes, EJ Corvettes, Caldor, Woolworth, Kmart, Kresge, Zayres. I mean, there were a lot of these basically price-oriented general merchants that created a different format, generally near the mall. In some cases, they went after markets where you could not support a big mall and a 3 or 4 anchors. And slowly, they started to gain share. And that started to cap a little bit of the growth of the regional malls and the regional department stores. But the thing that really started to shift in the 80s and 90s were category killers. So Home Depot, Best Buy, Bed Bath & Beyond, you name it, there was a category-focused merchant of some sort that had great assortment, low price, and more convenience because they were located off the mall. Williams-Sonoma, J. Crew, all these different formats, some of which were located in the mall, but the big hitters were largely located off the mall and these power centers. And so between dominant assortment, generally lower price, easier access, they started to pick away at the dominance of a lot of these department stores. And Sears, Penney's, Ward's, really started to get into trouble. The next wave, and this is where, when we talk about department stores, they really peaked in the 90s. The department stores, depending upon a little bit how you classify them, have been losing market share since the late 1990s, at least in the US. And so, like I said, a lot of it was Walmart, Target, the discount mass merchants. A lot of it was category killers, specialty stores. It was sort of death by 1,000 cuts. Everybody was trying to go after that. So no longer were they the only place or one of a few places. Now they were just one of many places to go. And this is before the internet. Then the next, I think, phase in the downfall of the department stores or the challenges of the department store was the growth of off-price retailers. So the TJ Maxx, Ross, Marshalls, these kind of players, which really went after apparel and home fashions in a lot of cases, which were really, aside from Sears, which had a big appliance and electronics business, the bread and butter of moderate department stores, apparel and home fashions, cosmetics. And so now you had all these off-price guys. Then you started to have the beauty, the Ultas, the Sephoras, picking off historically strong categories. So no longer are you the only place. Once again, you're now just more and more places trying to serve essentially the same type of customer or going after these merchandise categories. So even before e-commerce, there were just huge challenges in the department store business and in regional malls more broadly. Then you layer on top of that e-commerce. And this is when I think we really got this idea that I've talked about a lot of moderate department stores, at least, really being stuck in the middle, because you had lots of value-oriented players where you get a lower price, more convenience, bigger assortments, et cetera, and maybe sacrifice some service and ambiance. You had other players on the higher end or more specialty end where much more focused assortment, more tailored customer service, nicer experience, maybe more convenient because it's closer to your house. You don't have to deal with the parking deck and 2 or 3 levels and everything. A lot of these things, again, continued to take away from that. Then, and left these guys kind of in no man's land. As e-commerce started to become a bigger thing in these categories, that was just another way to get outpriced, be commoditized, or have your lack of convenience be made plain. So it's been a long ride, a long decline in the department store space. And I guess the question, and we've also seen a huge number of store closings. I mean, Sears basically doesn't exist. Penny's, I think, has closed about 30% of their stores in the last 5 years. Macy's has closed a bunch of stores. Dillard's, not so many. So major contraction, long
Kohl's.
time.
Yeah.
So, we should probably mention Kohl's. One of the things that's interesting about Kohl's is they were kind of the first player to pretty much go after the department store, kind of mid-priced, everyday apparel kind of customer, but package it in a more convenient way. So I think that, there wasn't that much difference between what a Kohl's is doing in apparel and home fashions and some other categories and what Sears or JCPenney has been trying to do. But they've had better, more convenient real estate and oftentimes could kind of leverage the shopper who was hitting a bunch of places to pick up a bunch of things. I'll just run into Kohl's. Just running into the regional department store or the regional mall. It's not the same kind of, get an errand done. It's more of an excursion.
It's a great exploration of the history. And speaking of history, I work for Hudson's Bay, which goes back to the 1600s, for God's sakes, as a retailer.
A lot of years to get this right. You're surprised.
And a lot of years to get it right. And they're still trying. God bless them. And, they're buying and selling. A couple of questions. And some of this we've actually touched upon in prior seasons. How did we get here? Like department stores, like in Neiman Marcus, Sears, these were powerhouses filled with very smart people who were running the businesses. And we've talked about, crisis to make change. But, as it felt like department stores more watched things happen to them than tried to change. So how did they get so stuck in the middle that they couldn't see? I'll give you an example. Sears was the place to go for Craftsman tools. What a great brand, right? Yep. Craftsman tools were great tools too, right? And that was a big part of the section. Great products, nice mix. But they just lost it. The Home Depots or the Lowe's just took that all away from them. It's a long conversation, and it's kind of maybe for another topic or maybe for listeners to go back a couple of episodes. But in summary, how did we get here?
Well, I think number one, there was not a recognition on the part of a lot of these brands as to how important distribution strategy was, that it had a lot to do with the real estate first, that, the formats that were winning were more focused on certain customers and were more convenient in a lot of respects. And this is probably another episode because I've been thinking about this a lot, but convenience is one of those words that I think people throw around. But, it can be convenient for me just to run in and run out very quickly, right? But it can also be convenient for me to go far and take a lot of time if it's really going to pay off. So I think RH, we talked about, if you're interested in that sort of product and you're that sort of customer, it's convenient to go to RH because you're going to see everything you like and you trust them and it will pay off perhaps for you. Which I think with moderate department stores, they had a little bit of everything for everybody, but they didn't realize how they were getting picked off by more focused competitors. And so this everything for everybody strategy was their Achilles heel. And then they tried to fix their real estate, and they were never going to be able to fix their real estate fundamentally. They had to be willing to compete with themselves. The argument we had all the time at Sears, because even if you have strong brands and an interesting mix, you still have to give the customer a reason to come to the store or a reason to go to your website. And the real estate has just been the Achilles heel. Now, some of it, not to get too inside baseball, there's a lot of forces that kept Sears and others afloat because of the way regional malls work, where they're very dependent, as you know, on these deals that were forged years ago for the anchor tenants, where they don't pay much rent, but they have to operate. So in Sears' case, I know, we didn't pay rent at a lot of these places. And so we could break even in a store location, even though the economics of it were terrible. And so our decision was, well, do we go spend a bunch of capital and sign up for a bunch of rent to build that store that we could build across the street? Because long term, that will give us a chance to save the business. But the dynamics of that, the sort of, some of it's cultural, but some of it is just the reality of the way people think about economics. But if you're starting with a clean sheet of paper, you would never build a Sears, and you wouldn't, nobody's building any more Macy's or JCPenney or Dillard stores, right? I mean, it's just a format that doesn't make any sense. So there's these forces that kept these retailers stuck basically in real estate that has no chance of ever being winning real estate, but also kept them from investing off the mall, which was very obvious what these people needed to do 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big discussion, right? It's as big as a department store discussion, as big as a physical department store. But let's cast our mind forward a little bit. So it's pretty clear that Amazon didn't bring death to department stores. So if anyone's listening and still thinks that, I think we can quickly dispel that. But it is also the case that you're fairly pessimistic around the future of department stores and their ability to turn it around. Now,
yes,
we should also say that department stores have a spectrum as well. I mean, you've got JCPenney all the way up to a Holt Renfrew or a Neiman Marcus and a Nordstrom's. So we are batching them together. How much is their future tied to regional malls, and how much is their ability to kind of branch out and be more innovative, like the Nordstrom local stores that kind of add a different pizzazz? So give me a broad sense of your thoughts around turning this fairly big ship around.
Well, the first thing I would make a bit of a distinction when we talk about department stores between the moderate department stores and the higher end luxury department stores. When we talk about Nordstrom's, Neiman's, Saks, Holt Renfrew, Bloomingdale's, number one, they have a stronger reason for being. They have more unique service model. They have more unique differentiated products. For the most part, they have very strong digital complements to what they're doing. And so I don't see them as being in the middle. They're more, have a potential for a distinctive business model, or they have a distinctive business model. Their issue is really more that it's very mature. It's not so much about real estate. It's because there's not a lot of growth potential for a bunch of reasons, which is probably a different episode. But when we talk about the moderate department stores, my question is, if you look at the amount of real estate they have, the fixed costs they have to operate the business, they have to, at some point, whether we're talking about Macy's or Penny's or Dillard's, a few other regional ones, they have to grow the business. None of them have grown the business in 20 years. But, underlying growth, none. And so the question is, if you believe that it's a slow slide to oblivion, unless they start to acquire new customers and grow the business with the customers they have, what needs to change to do that in a material way? And I can't work that out. It's great to add some new products. It's great to update your stores. It's great to have curbside pickup. Yeah. But all of those things are not differentiators. The Penny's prototype store, that's not too far from me. They've got a coffee shop. They've got some nice signing. But for that store to work, they have to steal share from somebody else. And my question is, from whom and why, other than price? The department stores have been pretty good at discounting to drive the business. They haven't been very good at winning loyal customers at the scale they need to. So my fear is, like I said, I can't really work out what that would be that would make such a profound difference. And my fear is that what will happen is, because, if the last 20 years are any indication, despite lots of efforts, some of which I've worked on, not much has changed. So the thing that has happened is they've closed stores. And the only thing we know about closing stores is that's not helping the customer. That is helping maybe your financial situation. But when I think about a Macy's or a Penny's, think about how many more TJ Maxx's, Kohl's, Targets there are than these department stores. You have to drive by 2 or 3 of your competitors. So they are making themselves less convenient by closing stores. We know that you don't make that business up online. And what is that compelling reason for a lot of customers to drive past all these other stores I have closer to me that are frankly easier to get in and out of, probably have better prices, or why don't I just order it on the internet? So I can see some incremental things, what I call the slightly better version of mediocre. But in terms of really a profound shift, I haven't heard anybody articulate anything that sounds like, okay, yes, that's going to really move the dial, or that's something that, none of these other competitors that have stolen market share for 20, 30 years can't instantly replicate or replicate within 6 months, or just discount to keep the customer. So I hate to be so pessimistic. I wish it were different, but I don't see, broadly speaking, a ton of hope.
Well, let's talk about hope. I mean, when I think about department stores doing different things, I do think of Nordstrom as a great case in terms of their local stores, building more presence than less, but at a smaller scale. I do think of an edge case like Kohl's, who's taking returns back from Amazon. That they say, I mean, that's interesting. And I do think of some department stores that might counter your assertion that they can't make up the store closure by .com sales. I mean, we're told kind of by testament that, listen, you don't need as many stores because it's shifting to online. I think of, for example, of Hudson's Bay, they've got 2 stores in some towns where they really only need 1. Yeah, arguably they still have a presence in the city, and they could arguably still do pretty well on their online business. Is that a hope for the future, a smaller footprint, and just really step on the gas of digital? Or you don't think that that's a way to? It's certainly not a competitive advantage versus others. Everybody can kind of do it.
Well,
is that a path forward at least?
I think you have to be careful. It's a lot about focus. And I think the broader challenge with the moderate, which is why, I'm more optimistic about the Saks and Neiman's and Nordstroms of the world than JCPenney, because they are very much in the middle. By consolidating space and hoping you can make it up online, you don't have strong enough magnets to drive traffic to the website or to the store. You've got a lot of stuff that's pretty easy substitutes. So I think if you compare to say and I think Kohl's is definitely much stronger because they're not in regional malls. You have more differentiated product. We're seeing Target add a lot of, private brands. Those can be things that can give you differentiation as well as online. I think the hope for department stores, and I think ultimately we're only going to see one department store on the mall. I think we're going to consolidate. And so as others go out, some of that market share will consolidate. But I think the strategy that has some chance of working is to invest in more kind of flagship, I'm using that term loosely, call them, say, magnet stores in an area which are really special, probably smaller than most of them. I was, just to tell one story, I was at a pretty good shopping mall here in Dallas over the weekend, and a couple hundred stores, used to have 5 anchors. They now have 4 because Sears went out. There's a Dillard's, there's a Macy's, there's a JCPenney. They only need 1. Those 3 stores are, practically identical, and all of 3 of them are too big for the business. So this is why I talk about the bulldozer business, because that mall itself should be probably at least a third smaller, and the anchors have to really be reimagined. But I can see a scenario where you invest in, particularly as competition falls away, something really special that happens to be on the mall. Then you have kind of a hub and spoke system. So whether that's the Nordstrom local kind of service center that gives you brand awareness, but solves a particular purpose, not I'm going to a store to see stuff kind of purpose. Or potentially, some of these more focused stores like Macy's is trying with their Market by Macy's and their Bloomie's store. I think the challenge of getting there from here is every Bloomie's or every Market by Macy's you open, number one, takes some significant capital. It assumes you're going to win enough business away from the neighborhood competition you have. And that one location does maybe, if you're lucky, $7 or $8 million. So if you're one of these big retailers and you're going to embark on this small store strategy, it takes a lot of time and a lot of capital to get that right, while your core business, you're closing stores and consolidating and maybe having to invest a ton of capital in those magnet locations. And my experience from Sears that was essentially the strategy that we were going to embark on. We're going to open kind of a Kohl's-like store off the mall, some specialty stores, and migrate to a much smaller number of mall-based locations over time. The problem with that was the capital and the risk was enormous. And most of these companies that don't, I don't have to get too into like the capital market side of it, but, Macy's ability to say, hey, investors, we want to invest several $billion in this strategy over the next 10 years, and it's going to be pretty messy, and we're going to lose a bunch of money, but trust us, it's going to be amazing when we get done. That CEO, say goodbye to Jeff Gennette if that's what he's proposing, because no board's going to sign up for that strategy. So, again, it gets back kind of the earlier question. Even if you got a pretty good strategy, if you're tied to the malls and you've got these big, huge stores that you don't pay any money for, and now you basically have to re-up with a lot of capital in keeping some while spending a lot of capital to build out e-commerce and a bunch of other things. The economics of that are really, really challenging. And so even if I had an idea, which I kind of do, of what that would look like, it's such a capital intensive, long-term risky strategy. And, frankly, the things we're seeing right now from Macy's, are pretty solid ideas. They just should have been done 15 or 20 years ago, because they run the risk of running out of runway to mount a turnaround and losing patience and just kind of starting a downward spiral in their core business. So again, I'm Dr. Doom on this, but I think Kohl's is much better positioned than just about any of the other moderate department store space. I think Macy's has got a little bit more life in them. I don't understand why Penny's exists. I don't understand why Dillard's exists. I don't understand why Belk exists. And you can sort of insert your equivalents in whatever country you live in if you don't happen to live in the United States or aren't familiar with the United States.
Well, I don't know. Like, in some ways, I'm a little more sanguine about the opportunity to open many small stores from a strategic perspective, because then it raises your awareness to grow the .com business. Like, I can get there in that line of thinking, right? So I got one big store, but I got 7 little stores. And every time people drive by them, they're going, they used to old marketing slogan for Hudson's Bay, it's hard not to think of the Bay. Mm-hmm. I need to be thought of. Like, I think sometimes these big department stores lose because people just, they fall out of the funnel. In other words, they fall out of the consideration set.
I was a proponent of that sort of idea when I was at Sears. I was a proponent of that strategy at Neiman's. That those didn't work out for various reasons. But I think that
too early. You're too way ahead of your time. Maybe the issues you're just.
I'm always way ahead.
You're way ahead of your time.
Always way ahead.
If they would have done that 20, 30 years ago, really, we've been in the .com era, 20 some years. That it feels like, as you said, a good strategy for 15 years ago. It's been a great episode talking about department stores. I feel like there's a lot more we can talk about. Good thing we are weekly and we've got a whole season ahead of us. We haven't even talked about Amazon's venture into department stores, which kind of leads us into naturally a discussion about what the heck is a department store anyway? Is that an IKEA? Is that a this? Is that a this? So maybe that's good folly or good topics to talk about and chew on, so to speak, in future episodes. So for this episode, let's wind it up in terms of we've talked about this part 2. We're back next week. We got a great guest next week back on the rails. And again, call out to anyone listening on the podcast. We visit our YouTube channel. This entire episode actually is going to be up on our YouTube channel, where you get to see you and I in person. And that's and how much fun is that? I'm wearing a different shirt for anybody who's following, because I noticed I was wearing the same shirt in every episode.
I'm wearing a different color of pretty much the same shirt than last episode, I think.
Well, and I got, different shade of black. So anyway, listen, if you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast platforms, so you can catch up with all our great interviews. Subscribe, so that just automatically shows up. Tell your friends, and also in new insights and new episodes will show up every week. So tell your friends. Because that will help us share the word, the good wisdom. Now, be sure and check out, us out on our new YouTube channel. Not so new anymore. We got a couple of episodes up there, and just look for Remarkable Retail.
And I'm Steve Dennis. You can check out more of my work at my website, stephenpdennis.com, or on Forbes, or on Twitter. And please check out my second edition of my book, Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, available just about everywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast and a bunch of other stuff. You can find me on LinkedIn, learn about me on meleblanc.co. All right, Steve, great episode. Look forward to chatting again next week. Be safe and have a great rest of your day.
Same to you.